Under the general fund reserve projection, we're here to talk about reserves. The city needs to maintain a level of reserves for cash flow purposes. Need to maintain it in case there's an emergency. We're already in a sort of a fiscal crisis, so I would say we've already in the emergency stage, but if something happened, something broke, something we had to replace, you need a reserve. You can't have no reserves. Plus, you need to have a cash flow. We actually receive our money. We don't receive it the same time we pay out our bills. We receive most of our money twice a year, in December and in April. However, we pay people every 2 weeks here. We also pay our bills every week. So we have a cash flow issue, and that's why you need to have a reserve in the general fund. All cities have general fund reserves. I've seen policies everywhere from 25% down to 15%. Now the norm is definitely below 15%. 10%, 8%, you don't see much less than that, or 7%. I mean, it doesn't go any lower than that, again, for cash flow purposes. So with that, if you look at our, this is a revenue reserve projection. If you take our current, if you go to revised, if you go to the middle column, you look at revised projected expenditures, we have expenditures of $15.6 million. If we make a cut of $581,000 this fiscal year, we will be down to $15 million. Even with that, we will still use reserves of $1.2 million. So we are still having to use our reserves, even though I'm making a recommendation to cut our general fund this fiscal year. That is still higher than what we had budgeted. We had budgeted $842,000. On the positive note, because of a one-time accrual adjustment with our auditors, our reserve fund has gone up from a 2.6 number to 2.9, so that definitely helps with our reserve level, our savings account. So we're starting off our reserves a little bit higher for this fiscal year than what we had planned to in our last budget. So that's a good thing. However, we're using that at a dramatic rate. So by making a cut of $581,000 this fiscal year, we will end up approximately with $1.6 million. And actually, can you go back to the early slide? I'll get to that in a second. So we're going to end up with $1.6 million in the ending fund balance. That would leave us approximately 11% in the general fund for our reserve. Because of the dramatic rate that we're using our reserves, because of the dramatic difference between our revenues and our expenditures for 09-10, we are, even by cutting by $1.9 million, we're going to be dropping our reserves to 8.7%, because we're basically at a point where we're just going so fast using our reserves. We have to cut early and cut fast to be able to basically pull out of it. If you want to go to the next slide now, this is more visual. Okay, the blue section is the scenario where we make the cuts. The red section is where we're not making the cuts. If you look at the red section, we end up with a negative cash balance. This is our general fund balance, $1.2 million if we do no cuts. This is not a situation that we can be in. So just dramatically, you can see how fast we're using up our reserves. The zero is in the middle there. We're not quite the middle. But how dramatically we have to use up our reserves because of our rate of expenditures are much greater than our revenue generation. And you can see the scenario over this year, next year, with cuts and without cuts. It's very dramatic. And switch it. So I wasn't sure how this was going to show up on here, so I apologize to the audience. This is the cash flow analysis. This is the math. Everyone wants to see the numbers. This is the math. So I'm going to go over it pretty slowly to show you how fast we go through the reserve. So basically, the situation we're in right now, we start off with a fund balance. This is our reserves. This $2.9 million effective July 1st. We project a revenue of 13.8. We have an expenditure projection of 15.6. We use a reserves of 1.8, $1 million higher than what we thought. We have an ending fund balance of $1 million. That leaves us with a percent of reserve at 6.9%. So it's a little bit low than what our 8% target is. Okay. We start off July 1, 2009. We start off with $1 million, $1,078,000. This isn't our savings. This is our remaining balance of our general fund. We have a projected revenues of 13.8. Our expenditures are at 16.1. We need to use $2.3 million to be able to get to zero. But we only have $1 million to use. So that's why we end up with negative $1.2 million in this fiscal year. Next column, with proposed cuts. We start off with $2.9 million. Our revenues are 13.8. Our expenditures are 15.6 million. We make a cut of 581,950, and I will get into what that means. That brings us our balance for our expenditures. Our net expenditures will be $15 million. We will still use $1.2 million in reserves, but that leaves us a fund balance of $1.6 million. So starting July 1 of 2009, we would start off with $1.6 million in our reserves. We would have revenues of 13.8. Our expenditures are 16.1. I have a recommended cut of $1.9 million. That brings our net expenditures to 14.2. We will still be using reserves of $416,000. We still have to use reserves. I want to clarify that with that cut. And you end with an ending balance of $1.2 million, which is 8.77% of your budget. So how do we get to those numbers, those two numbers that I'm saying, the cuts of $581,000 for this fiscal year and $1.9 million for next fiscal year? Okay. There's a combination of things that we will use to be able to achieve those figures. First thing in your packet is we've identified, and this is something I've been working on with all the senior managers on, and all of them are here tonight. We've identified service cuts. What does that mean? Stuff, equipment, programs. The pool operation is one of those examples. Different things that we can come up with that would be a service cut to the community, be less equipment that we're buying, that we can go without in this fiscal time. So that number for this fiscal year is $208,023. This would require, based on your line item budgeting, this would require myself bringing back a resolution to you by account code, what items I'm cutting out, so that way you would approve that, so we wouldn't spend it. And just to go back to your packet, I'm going to have you go back for a second. In your packet, in the very back, is detailed worksheets. The first one says they look like page 12 of your packet. In that worksheet, the bottom half of page 12 begins the listing of those service cuts. And those service cuts in detail are written up starting pages 14 through, should I have this planned, probably 24. So there's detail right up on each of those service cuts. And when I get to them, I have one clarification on one of them. On the on the 09-10 side, we also have service cuts of $554,958 identified, and there's also worksheets on those as well. Now the service cuts for 09-10, the $554,000 figure, those cuts we don't have to act on right now. We can act on those as part of the budget deliberations for 09-10. We can act on them early, but that's one area that we don't physically have to act on this month. That's what I'm just pointing out. That's like the only area. But the areas that we do need to act on, and I'll go through it, are the service cuts, which are identified this fiscal year as $208,023, and the first column basically, 08-09. And the reason why I'm recommending that we act on them is because of our cash flow situation. We need to begin to make cuts now in our general fund.